Restart it.
Not yet, not yet. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the infamous Sylvia channel. And right now we're getting ready to go continue our reenactment of Robert Sylvester Kelly's trial. And the date we're reenacting is August 30th. This is when his assistant, Suzette Mayweather, we have my cast here. Sorry for the delay. And let's get started.
The witness will step down. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Are you ready to call your next witness?
We are, Your Honor. The government calls Suzette Mayweather.
Cruz.
No, it's you.
Oh, sorry.
Deputy.
Please rise. Raise your right hand.
I do.
Suzette Mayweather, called as witness, having been duly sworn, affirmed, was examined and testified as follows.
You can take your mask off. Just a few things before we start. The first thing is, please don't speak too quickly or talk over whichever lawyer is asking you questions. Our court reporters are taking down everything you say, and it's easier for them if you speak slowly and if you wait until the lawyer finishes asking you questions. If there's a question that you don't understand or you want to have it repeated, let me know. I'll have the lawyer change the question or rephrase it. And just do your best to answer the specific question that you're being asked. Okay?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Miss Mayweather, where did you grow up?
In Houston.
Do you have any siblings?
I do.
How many siblings do you have?
3.
Keep your voice up. 3.
Do you have any nicknames?
Yes.
And what is your nickname?
Twin.
Why is your nickname Twin?
I have a twin sister.
What is your twin sister's name?
Alizette.
Does she share the same last name as you?
Yes.
I'm showing what is in evidence as government's exhibit. Do you recognize the individual in government's exhibit 39?
Yes.
Who is that?
My sister.
Alizette?
Yes.
And you mentioned you were twins, correct?
Yes.
What kind of twins are you?
Identical.
Miss Mayweather, how far did you go in school?
College.
What did you study in school?
Biology.
Did you graduate from college?
Yes.
Are you employed?
Yes.
Have you ever worked in the entertainment business?
Yes.
What kind of work have you done in the entertainment business?
Management, consulting, promotions, personal assistant, logistics.
I'm showing what is in evidence as government's exhibit. Ms. Mayweather, do you recognize the individual in government's exhibit 1?
Yes.
Who is that?
Rob
Do you know his last name?
Kelly.
Have you met Rob Kelly in person before?
Yes.
Do you see him in court today?
Yes.
Can you point him out and identify an item of clothing that he's wearing?
Yes. Blue suit.
Indicating the defendant.
Approximately when did you first meet the defendant?
Like the early 90s, like late 90s.
How did you first come to meet the defendant?
Through mutual friends, band members at a concert.
Whose band members?
Rob's.
The defendant's?
Yes.
Where were you when you first met the defendant?
That I recall, London.
Why were you in London?
For the show, the concert.
Whose show?
Rob's.
Did you attend the defendant's concert?
Yes.
Prior to meeting the defendant, had you attended any concerts of the defendants before that?
Maybe stateside before London. I don't recall.
Would you consider yourself a fan of the defendants at that time?
At that time, no.
After seeing the defendant in London, did you see him again?
Yes.
Where do you recall next seeing the defendant?
Other shows.
Shows of the defendants?
Yes.
At some point, did you begin to see the defendant outside of his concerts?
Yes.
In what capacity would you see the defendant?
Friend.
Where would you see the defendant?
It could be a show. It could be after the show. It could be at a restaurant.
Did you ever go to the defendant's home?
Yes.
Where was the defendant living when you went to his home?
In Olympia Fields.
Where is Olympia Fields?
It's in Chicago, outside of Chicago.
Do you recall the first time you visited the defendant's home?
Yes.
What was the reason for visiting his home?
A friend passed away that worked for him.
Do you recall the friend's name?
We called him Janky.
What, if anything, did he do for the defendant?
He was his videographer.
Who, if anyone, do you recall meeting at this event?
That I still associate with would be Bubba and Jabba.
Do you know Bubba? Is Bubba a nickname?
Yes.
Do you know Bubba's real name?
Jermaine.
What is his full name?
Maxie. Jermaine Maxie.
You mentioned Jabba. Is that a nickname?
Yes.
Do you know Jabba's real name?
Elijah Maxie.
Any relation between Elijah Maxie and Jermaine Maxie?
Yes.
What is that relation?
Brothers.
Do you recall meeting anyone else at the defendant's home at that event?
No.
After that event at the defendant's home in Olympia Fields, did you continue to see the defendant after that?
Yes.
How would you describe your relationship with the defendant?
Friends. Like Rob is like a brother.
Over time, as you develop your friendship with the defendant, did you ever travel to see him in concert?
Yes.
And did you ever travel with the defendant while he was on tour?
While working with him or before?
During your friendship with the defendant?
Yes.
So you mentioned working with the defendant. At some point, did you begin working with the defendant?
Yes.
And approximately when did you start working for the defendant?
Around October 2015.
What kind of arrangement did you have with the defendant?
As far as work?
Yes.
Personal assistant.
Did you have a particular schedule when you were working with the defendant?
Yes.
What schedule was that?
2 weeks on, 2 weeks off.
You mentioned that you were 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Did he have a personal assistant who would be working with him while you were on your 2 weeks off?
Yes.
Who was that?
My sister, Alizette.
So at that time that you started working for the defendant in approximately October 2015, was your twin sister Alizette also working for the defendant?
Yes.
Did you ever have any arrangements about payment?
Yes.
What agreement was that?
I think it was 800 weekly.
Did you have any agreements with respect to other expenses?
Yes.
What kind of arrangement did you have?
Rob covered travel and hotel.
And so when you were working for the defendant, did you in fact travel as part of your work?
Yes.
You testified that you started working in approximately October 2015 for the defendant. How long did your working relationship with the defendant last?
Until until around February 2017.
Once you entered into the formal working agreement with the defendant, what were your responsibilities?
As his personal assistant, anything he needed, running errands, shopping, grocery shopping, taking care of laundry, if he had guests that needed to come into town, book a hotel or book airfare.
Did you, in fact, for the defendant, when you were working for him, make travel arrangements?
Yes.
Who would you make travel arrangements for?
Friends or some of his friends, female friends, male friends.
When you booked travel arrangements for the defendant's friends, including you, testified female friends, how would you know who to book travel for?
Well, he will call me and say, I have a guest coming to town, and they will be texting you.
When you say he, do you mean the defendant?
Yes.
Were there times that female friends of the defendant called or text
Text? Yes.
for the purpose of booking travel?
Yes.
What information would you obtain from the female friend of the defendant when you were booking their travel?
City that they were traveling from, date that they were traveling, name and date of birth.
Who paid for the defendant's female friend's travel?
Mr. Kelly.
Who paid for their accommodations if they stayed, if they were traveling into another city?
Mr. Kelly.
Based on both your friendship with the defendant and your attendance at events involving the defendant, and then ultimately your work as his personal assistant, did you meet members of the defendant's circle of friends and his other employees?
Yes.
I'm showing just the witness government's exhibit 2, marked for identification purposes. Do you recognize the individual in government exhibit 2?
Yes.
Who is that?
Bruce.
Who is Bruce's last name?
Kelly.
Have you met Bruce Kelly in person before?
Yes.
Who is Bruce? Does Bruce have a relation to the defendant?
Yes.
What is that relation?
His brother.
The government offers government into evidence.
No objection.
That's in evidence. You want to publish it?
Yes, Your Honor. Government Exhibit 2 was received in evidence. What, if anything, did Bruce Kelly do for the defendant?
When I met him, he was one of his assistants.
I'm showing the witness what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit 3. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who is that?
June Brown.
What, if anything, did he do for the defendant?
Just knew him to be another assistant.
Showing the witness what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit 4. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who do you recognize this to be?
George Kelly.
Does George Kelly have any relation to the defendant?
Yes.
What is that relation?
Uncle.
Does he have any nicknames?
Junebug.
What, if anything, did he do for the defendant?
Assistant.
I'm showing the witness what is in evidence as government's Exhibit 5. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who is that?
Van.
Do you know Van's last name?
Pulling.
What, if anything, did he do for the defendant?
Van driver and basketball.
When do you mean by basketball?
Ron plays basketball a lot. He will play.
So Van would play basketball with the defendant.
Yes.
Showing the witness what is in evidence as government's Exhibit 8. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who is this?
Blackie.
Is Blackie a nickname?
Yes.
Do you know Blackie's real name?
No.
What, if anything, did Blackie do for the defendant?
I believe tour manager at one point.
We've spoken about a number of individuals in the photographs that I've just spoken with you, and you mentioned some of them were assistants, some were drivers, some were tour manager. Is it fair to say that they all work for the defendant?
Yes.
You testified that you worked for the defendant from October 2015 to approximately February of 2017.
Yes.
And you also testified that you had traveled and engaged with the defendant prior to working with the defendant, correct?
Yes.
Did you see these individuals in their capacity as employees for the defendant during the time prior to your working with the defendant?
Yes.
And also when you were working for the defendant as well?
Yes. All except for Blackie.
Do you recall when it was that you met Blackie?
Maybe early 2015. I don't recall.
I'm showing you what is in evidence as government's Exhibit 9. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who is that?
Bubba Jermaine Maxey.
Is that the individual you met at the defendant's house in Olympia Fields?
Yes.
What, if any, relation did Jermaine Maxey have to the defendant?
They were like really close friends, like brothers.
Did he work for the defendant?
No.
I'm showing you what is in evidence as government's Exhibit 17. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who is that?
Top Gun.
Do you know Top Gun's real name?
Foster, I believe. Lay.
What, if anything, did Top Gun do for the defendant?
He was the tour bus driver.
Was he the tour bus driver while you were working for the defendant?
Yes.
What about prior to your working for the defendant?
Yes.
Showing the witness that is in evidence as government's Exhibit 36. Do you recognize the individual in this photograph?
Yes.
Who is that?
Diana Copeland.
What, if anything, did Diana Copeland do for the defendant?
Assistant.
Was she the defendant's assistant prior to October 2015 when you were working for the defendant?
Yes.
And did she act as the defendant's assistant after you began working for the defendant in October of 2015?
No.
At any point after 2015, did she work with the defendant?
Yes, the latter part of 2016.
Showing the witness what is in evidence as government's Exhibit 38. Do you recognize the individual in government's Exhibit 38?
Yes.
Who is that?
Cheryl Mack.
What, if anything, did Cheryl Mack do for the defendant?
I knew her to be an assistant. She did his bookings, some form of management.
What time frame do you recall Cheryl Mack working for the defendant?
I'm not sure when she started. I think I may recall Cheryl around 2014, 2015.
Was she working with the defendant after you began working for the defendant in October 2015?
No.
Showing the witness what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit 42. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who is it?
Lily.
Do you know if Lily has a nickname?
Yes.
Do you know Lily's full name?
I do not recall.
What, if anything, did Lily do for the defendant?
Well, I met her as his god sister. I don't recall her being on staff. She wasn't on staff.
What time frame do you recall meeting Lily?
2016, sometime mid 2016.
I'm showing what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit. Do you recognize the Government's Exhibit 44? Excuse me. Do you recognize the individual in Government's Exhibit 44?
Yes.
Who is that?
Linda Minch.
What, if anything, did she do for the defendant?
Hello?
What, if anything, did she do for the defendant? What, if anything, did she do for the defendant?
She was his attorney.
While you were working for the defendant in 2015 to 2017, do you know whether or not she was acting as the defendant's attorney?
Yes, she was.
What about prior to your formal working relationship with the defendant?
Yes, she was.
Showing the witness what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit 48. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who is that?
Dr. McGrath.
What, if anything, did Dr. McGrath do with respect to the defendant?
His physician.
Have you met with Dr. McGrath in person before?
Yes.
In what capacity?
When Rob had to go to the hospital, Dr. McGrath was there, and I met him at a concert, one of Rob's concerts.
Showing the witness what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit 49. Do you recognize Government's Exhibit 49?
Yes.
Who is that?
Ian.
Do you know Ian's full name?
No.
What, if anything, did Ian do?
His engineer.
The defendant's engineer?
Yes.
Was Ian working for the defendant when you were working for the defendant?
Yes.
What about during the time frame prior to your formal working arrangement with the defendant?
Yes.
I'm showing what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit 50. Do you recognize the individual in this photograph?
Yes.
Who is that?
Abel.
What, if anything, did Abel do for the defendant?
Engineer.
An engineer for the defendant?
Yes.
Do you recall whether or not Abel was working for the defendant from when you were with the defendant as his personal assistant?
Yes.
What about prior to your formal working arrangement?
Yes.
You previously testified that you attended the defendant's concerts during your friendship as well, as while you were working for him. Is that correct?
Yes.
At those concerts, did you ever see the defendant or his employees or members of his entourage distributing anything during those concerts?
Yes.
What did you see? What did you see being distributed?
His number.
When you say his number, whose number do you mean?
Rob's.
Who do you see distributing his number?
I don't recall specifically who, just some of the guys.
Guys who either worked for or were friends with the defendant?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
You can answer.
Yes.
When you say they were distributing the defendant's number, how were they doing that?
I don't recall.
Would they distribute? My question is, in what form would they distribute it?
On paper?
I'm showing the witness what is in evidence as Government's Exhibit 75C. Actually, I'll start with Government's Exhibit 75, which is in evidence. Do you recognize the individual in Government's Exhibit 75?
Yes.
And I'm showing just the witness and the jury currently. Before I show the witness, do you know the individual who is in Government's Exhibit 75? Do you know that individual's name?
Yes.
Showing you Government's Exhibit 75A, listed on that document. Is that a photograph of the individual who was in Government's Exhibit 75?
The name?
Is that the same individual who was just in the photograph I showed you just a moment ago?
Yes.
And is that the name that you know this individual by?
Yes.
Now I'm showing, which can be published to both the jury and the public, Government's Exhibit 75. That's the same photograph, correct? In 75 and 75A.
Yes.
And for the purpose of your testimony here today, when we refer to this individual, we're going to refer to this individual as Jane, okay?
Okay.
Have you ever met Jane in person?
Yes.
Where were you when you met Jane?
New York, here in New York,
And why were you in New York?
for Rob's concert.
And do you recall the venue where the concert occurred?
I believe it was the Barclay.
You said, I'm sorry, you said Barclay?
Yes.
Sitting here today, do you recall the date of the concert at the Barclays?
No.
During your travels with the defendant, did you have a social media?
Yes.
And did you have a Facebook page?
Yes.
And did you post on your Facebook page about your travels with the defendant?
Yes.
So I'm showing just the witness, 3500SM11. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Does this refresh your recollection as to the location and the date on which you met Jane? Does this refresh your recollection as to the location and the date on which you met Jane?
Yes.
And what date was that?
September the 25th, 2015.
Okay. And you previously had testified that you thought the venue was Barclays.
Yes.
What's the full name of the venue?
Barclay Center.
Can you please explain to the jury how it came to be that you met Jane?
Yes. I called Rob to let him know that my sister and I had arrived in New York for his show, and he called me back. He didn't answer, but he called me back FaceTime. And when he called me back on FaceTime, he and I were talking.
And can you just explain to the jurors what FaceTime is?
It's like facial chat.
So like a
A facial video.
video phone call.
Right, yes.
And so you, the defendant, called you back via FaceTime.
Yes.
And what happened?
And he and I were talking. And then he put the phone on her and said, "Tell Auntie Twin hi."
When you say her, do you mean he put the phone on Jane?
Yes.
Now, this was the first time, I think you testified this was the very first time you were meeting Jane, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, did the defendant or anyone else introduce Jane by her name?
No.
And you testified that the defendant stated, "Say hello to Auntie."
Auntie Twin.
And when he said, "Say hello to Auntie Twin," who was the defendant referring to?
Me.
Now, do you have any relation to the defendant?
No.
Do you have any relation to Jane?
No.
Can you explain to the jurors why the defendant referred to you as Auntie?
Objection.
Overruled.
Because we had more than just a friendship. He was like my brother. He's like my brother. And culturally, we say cousins, auntie, uncle.
And so what, if anything, happened once the defendant said to Jane, "Say hello to Auntie"?
I said, well, she said, "Hi, Auntie Twin." And I said, "Hey, niece."
And when you refer to Jane as niece, is it fair to say that's a similar cultural term of endearment?
Yes.
After what, if anything, else happened on the FaceTime call?
He just directed me to call June Brown to meet with us to get us into the show. And that he would see us at the venue.
Now, you told the jury that you referred to Jane as niece. Did you continue to refer to Jane as niece after that?
Yes.
So you testified that there was a concert at the Barclays Center. Did you attend that concert?
Yes.
Did you see the defendant after the concert?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you do after the concert?
I recall we went to the cigar bar.
Do you recall where that cigar bar was?
Harlem.
Harlem, New York?
Yes.
And who went to the cigar bar?
I recall myself, my sister, Rob, Cash, Bubba, Van, and a friend of his named Todd.
And how did you get to the cigar bar?
On his Sprinter.
And was Jane on the Sprinter?
Yes.
And once you all got to the cigar bar, did you go in?
Yes.
Did Jane go in?
No.
And where was Jane while you were all in the cigar bar?
On the Sprinter.
After initially meeting Jane in the vicinity of attending that concert, did you speak with the defendant about who Jane was?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you discuss?
I eventually asked who was she and why was she there?
And what, if anything, did the defendant say in response?
He told me that she was an aspiring artist and that her parents had asked him if she could travel with him so that he could mentor her.
Now, after the concert at the Barclays Center, did you attend any of the other defendants' shows?
Yes.
Actually, to clarify and to back up, the concert at Barclays Center, was that part of the tour?
I'm not sure if it was a tour or if it was just a spot dates.
Did the defendant have any additional shows after the Barclays Center show?
Yes.
And did you attend the next show?
Yes.
Do you recall where you attended the next show?
DC.
Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
And did you travel with the defendant to that show?
I did not. No.
And so how did you get to Washington, D.C.?
I flew.
Do you recall the venue where the next show in Washington, D.C. occurred?
No.
I'm showing the witness 3500 SM11 at page 14. Do you see this there?
Yes.
And does this refresh your recollection as to the name of the venue?
Yes.
And what was the name of the venue?
Capital One Arena.
And what date did that occur?
September 26, 2015.
And when you were in Washington, D.C., was Jane there?
Yes.
Sitting here today, do you recall what city you were in on September 27, 2015?
Baltimore.
Okay. And what were you doing in Baltimore?
A show, a concert.
Whose show?
Mr. Kelly.
And did you attend that show?
Yes.
And was Jane also in Baltimore?
Yes.
After the show in Baltimore, did you attend any other concerts of the defendants?
Not in Baltimore, no.
And where was the next location, if you recall?
We came back to New York.
Do you recall what date you came back to New York?
No.
Showing the witness 3500 SM11, page 17. Does that refresh your recollection as to the date you were in New York after you were in Baltimore?
Yes.
And what date was that?
September 28th, 2015.
Have you ever been to a location called Jungle City Studios?
Yes.
And do you recall where Jungle City Studios is?
No.
And referring to the witness again to 3500 SM11 at page 17. Where is Jungle City Studio located?
New York.
And do you recall why you went to Jungle City Studios?
Yeah. It was Rob's listening party for his album.
What's the listening party?
Where there's media and some of, his fans, record execs, and they take a listen to his album that was coming out.
And who, if anyone, other than yourself, was at the Jungle City Studios listening party?
Cash.
And who is Cash?
Cash was Rob's stylist.
And was the defendant there?
Yes.
Do you recall what, if anything, happened on September 29, 2015, the day after the listening party?
No.
Showing the witness 3511 SM11 at page 18. Does that refresh your recollection as to what happened on September 29th, 2015?
Yes.
And what happened?
He left New York to go to the West Coast.
Now, when you say he left New York, who left New York?
Everyone. Mr. Kelly, myself, everyone.
Mr. Kelly's employees?
Yes.
And his entourage, who was with him at the time as well?
I believe so.
And prior to leaving New York, was Jane still there?
Yes.
And when you say she left New York to go to the West Coast, why were you going to the West Coast?
He had shows.
And do you recall what the first stop on the West Coast was going to be?
I believe it was Oakland.
Now, when you were leaving New York, is that New York City?
Yes.
How did you get from New York City to the West Coast in Oakland, California?
Sprinter.
What is a Sprinter?
It was his van.
The defendant's van?
Yeah.
And the other employees and other individuals who were going to the West Coast, how were they traveling?
Well, security had a security van, and most of the employees, like the production team, they flew.
What about did the defendant have a tour bus with him at the time?
Yes,
Okay. Did the tour bus also go cross country?
yes,
So you mentioned that you traveled in the Sprinter
yes,
from New York City to the West Coast, correct?
yes.
Who do you recall being in the Sprinter for that trip?
Jane,
Anyone else?
on and off, Mr. Kelly,
And anyone else?
my sister, Alizette.
How long was that trip from New York City to Oakland?
It was maybe over 24 hours.
Do you recall exactly how long it took?
No,
I'm showing the witness 3500 SM11 at 019. Can you see that there?
yes,
So do you recall where you were on October 1st, 2015?
the exhibit says,
Well, first, do you recall offhand?
looking now, yes,
Where were you?
exit 214 on I-80.
And so is it fair to say you were still on the road on October 1st, 2015?
Yes,
And turning to page 22, do you recall where you were on October 3rd, 2015?
Oakland,
And is that Oakland, California?
yes,
So is it fair to say that if you left on the 29th of 2015 and you arrived in Oakland in approximately October 3rd of 2015, it took a few days to get there?
yes,
Now, during the trip between New York City and Oakland, California, did you make any stops?
yes,
What kind of stops did you make?
food, restroom, just breaks.
Were there any shows in between New York City and Oakland, California?
I do not. Oh, I do not recall.
Had you ridden in a car cross country before that time?
No,
And was Jane on the Sprinter the entire time between when you left New York City to when you reached Oakland, California?
yes,
Now,
yes,
sitting today, do you recall the date when the defendant was scheduled to perform in Oakland, California?
no, not the exact date.
Showing the witness 3500 SM11. Does this refresh your recollection of the date of the defendant's performance in Oakland, California?
Yes,
And what was that date?
October 2nd.
After the defendant performed in Oakland, California, do you recall whether the defendant had any other performances in California?
Yes,
And did you attend those performances as well?
yes.
Do you recall where the next location was that you attended with the defendant?
I just remember it was an outdoor theater.
Do you remember the specific venue?
Name? No.
I'm showing the witness 3500 SM11, page 23. Does that refresh your recollection as to the name of the next venue?
Yes.
And what was the name of the venue?
Thunder Valley Outdoor Theater,
Where was that located?
Lincoln, California.
Do you recall the date?
Well, it shows October 4th.
Of 2015?
Yes.
After the defendant's performance on October 4th of 2015 in Lincoln, California, do you recall the next location that you went with the defendant to in California?
I believe Los Angeles.
And do you recall when you were in Los Angeles?
The exact date? No.
I'm showing the witness 3500 SM11 at page 26. Does this help to refresh your recollection approximately when you were in Los Angeles with the defendant?
Yes.
And what's that date?
October the 6th, 2015.
One moment, Your Honor. I'm showing just the witness government's exhibit 257A, B, and C for identification purposes. Do you recognize those? What's in 257A, B, and C?
Yes.
And what are those, generally speaking? And what are those, generally speaking? And what are those, generally speaking?
Yes.
Good. Your part is those are pictures that were taken in the Sprinter?
I'm sorry, it kicked me out. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Those are pictures that were taken in the Sprinter.
And starting with? Well, Your Honor, the government moves to admit 257A, 257B, and 257C.
Any objection?
Just one question. One question by way of voir dire.
Okay.
Miss Mayweather, do you have a recollection as to when those photographs were taken? Without seeing the date? No. Do you remember were you present when they were taken? Yes. And you testified a short while ago that it was sometime in October when this was likely taken? Yes. No objection.
All right. Those are in evidence then.
Prior to publishing them, does this refresh your recollection as to the date that those photographs were taken?
I show October the 7th
Of 2015?
of 2015, yes.
If we could publish for the jury and the public government's exhibit 257A, 257B, and 257C. Starting with 257C, are you, even if partially, are you in this photograph?
Yes.
And what can you be seen in this photograph?
I see my knee, my leg.
So here on the rightmost bottom corner of the 257C, that's your leg?
Yes.
Okay. With the striped garment here?
Yes.
And who is depicted in this photograph?
Mr. Kelly?
Showing you now government's exhibit 257A again, referring not to the individual's real name. Who do we see in this photograph?
I can see Mr. Kelly and Jane.
And in 257B, on the right-hand side, who is the individual there?
Mr. Kelly.
And on the left-hand side, who is the individual there?
Jane.
And I think there's an individual sort of center of the photograph, top center.
Yes.
Who is that?
My sister, Alizette.
Do you recall what, if any, other shows the defendant had in California after October 7th or after the Los Angeles show?
No.
I'm showing the witness 3500 SM11 at page 34. Does that refresh your recollection as to the next show of the defendants?
Yes.
And where did that show take place?
The Forum.
And do you recall the date?
It shows October the 10th, 2015.
And the location?
The Forum
The city?
in Inglewood, California.
Now it states here, well, I'll ask you this way. Do you recall who, other than yourself and the defendant, were at the venue for the show?
I specifically remember myself, my sister, and Cash, but I did see that I tagged Ruby Chris,
Who is Ruby Chris?
which is Bubba Jermaine. Bubba.
And I think you also said Jermaine.
Jermaine.
And was Jane there?
Yes.
And we've talked about a number of different locations in California that you, after the open show, was Jane there for those shows as well?
Yes.
You also mentioned Cash.
Yes.
Who is Cash?
Stylist.
The defendant stylist?
Yes.
And do you know Cash's full name?
Cash Howard.
I'm showing what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 86. That can be published to the public and the jury. Who is that?
Cash.
And is that the defendant stylist?
Yes.
I'm showing the witness what has been previously marked for identification purposes as Government's Exhibit 256. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's a photo of me and Mr. Kelly.
And where was this photograph taken?
It was taken in Chicago at his photo shoot for his Christmas album.
And do you recall the date that photograph was taken?
It shows October the 19th, 2015.
Your Honor, the government moves to admit Government's Exhibit 256.
No objection.
Okay, that's in evidence. You can publish.
And is that you in the striped skirt to the right of the photograph?
Yes.
And you said the defendant is also in the photograph, correct?
Yes.
You testified previously that the defendant introduced you to Jane prior to you all leaving from New York City to California. At any point, did you discuss with the defendant how he first came to meet Jane?
Yes.
And do you recall where this discussion took place?
Yes.
And where did it take place?
At his studio in Chicago.
And approximately how long after you returned from the trip, cross-country trip to California, did this discussion take place in Chicago?
I don't recall the exact time, but it was shortly after.
And what, if anything, did the defendant say about his first meeting Jane?
Well, he met her at a concert in Florida, and after the show, the parents wanted her to travel. Well, before the parents wanted her to travel, she called him too. Jane called him to meet up with me at his hotel. And she came to the hotel, and she came to meet him there about going on the road with him. And he said that she told him she was 18 years old. And it was until while they were at the hotel, the police came. And he was afraid because he didn't know what was going on. And they checked her for ID and gave her ID back. And eventually she came back to Chicago with him.
With the defendant?
Yes.
And what did he say happened with respect to Jane after she came back to Chicago with him?
She confessed to being 17.
And what, if anything, did the defendant say to you about when Jane told the defendant about the fact that she was 17?
Well, he was very upset. He was very upset that she lied to him, and he put her out of the sprinter because they were in the sprinter. He said he put her out of the sprinter, and a couple of hours later or so, Juice went to find her, and she was in the park.
And the conversation that you were having with this defendant when she was telling you this says was shortly after the trip to when you were in California, correct?
Correct.
And what, if anything, did the defendant tell you about what he did with respect to Jane after she told him that she was 17?
Well, once he learned that she was 17, he had a conversation with her parents, and her parents gave him guardian. They signed guardianship.
And did he tell you who, if anyone, would be responsible for Jane?
Yes.
And what did the defendant tell you?
Auntie Shell.
Your Honor, if this makes sense for the court, this may be a good stopping point.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to finish for the day. We will start up again tomorrow, same time, 9:30. Please do not talk about the case. Do not look up anything. Do not look anything up. But do have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow.
All rise.
Okay. Everybody can have a seat, and let's take the witness out. About how much longer do we have on direct with this witness? Forever?
Maybe forever. No, I'm kidding, Your Honor. It's hard to tell. I think I'll definitely be done before the lunch break tomorrow.
Let's just try to make sure we don't get too repetitive with her, though. Okay?
Yes.
And then are you anticipating another witness tomorrow? I guess it depends a little bit on the cross, but.
Yes, we are anticipating another witness.
Okay. How far along are we now in terms of witnesses?
We're pretty far along.
I mean, in terms of how much longer do you think the government's case will be? Because it's taking too long. I just get it.
Right. I'm hopeful that we will be able to finish the week of the 13th.
Okay.
The fact that next week is a short week is obviously.
No, I know. Okay, all right. Let me just see the parties over to the side just for scheduling purposes. Anything before we break for the day?
Nothing from us, Your Honor. No from the government.
All right. See you tomorrow. Thanks very much. And that was the end of the 30th. Whew. Where are my hands itching?
That's the end of the 30th.
End of the 30th.
All right. End of the 30th. Well, to me, it seemed like the government just keep going over and around in circles and not really getting into any
of the meat of their case.
No, just these same old, did you this? Did you go there? Did you do that? None of this is Rico.
But did you hear her intention of what she was riding with him for? It was not to have sex. It was there to learn the music.
To learn the music. Yep.
So.
Yeah, the government, I mean, keep repeating. And who is Bubba? Okay, get to the basis of your case.
Right.
Don't worry about the full name, whatever. Just get to the basis of your case.
God. All of these different people, and it's leading to nothing.
It's leading to nothing. They just employees.
And did he work? Did they work before you came? Did they work after you came? Did they go to the bathroom? Did they climb the tree? Did they color with blue?
I know. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, can you think of Steve Jobs? Do you think he picking up his clients from the airport? No. He'll go. He orders people. Probably got a chauffeur. A limousine company that picks up his clients or whatever. The big people are not doing all that menial stuff themselves. Damn people, they got housekeepers that's cleaning their houses. No.
Mute your phone for a second.
I gotta go out.
No, that's Travel the World stuff in the background. Thank you, Travel.
I'm sorry. Okay,
it's
look.
Crazy. This is crazy.
She remember everything about the numbers. She remember everything, them giving in the numbers and everything, but she can't remember one person. One person who gave the number. She remember everything else, but she can't remember one person gave out the number.
Because she don't want to mess up. That's what it is. That's what it is.
And she only can mention cash at the listening party. Was there anybody else there? You know what I'm saying? Why are they singling out people?
Yeah, this makes no sense.
It really don't. It's just too long, and they should have been through.
Really?
They should have been through.
Talk about she met Jane. You didn't meet Jane over the phone. That's not when you met her. You met her in wherever they were in person. Chicago. That's when you met her.
Yeah.
In person, that's when you met her. You meet over the phone. You can't meet nobody over the phone.
Exactly. I
don't even talk to them over the phone.
Yeah. It's just crazy. It's just, whew. I'm so glad they rested because I'm taking another week of them.
Yes, that just killed me about that phone number thing. You can remember everything else, but you can't remember one person that you saw giving out the number. Man, come on with that.
Yeah, they have some selective memories.
Yeah, what about the guardianship? You said that they gave guardianship to Robert, but on that guardianship thing, it was somebody else's name on there.
Yeah. Yeah, they need to go on in and throw this on out.
Yeah, it's just too much.
Yeah.
Which I know they're not going to do, but.
Yeah, this needs to be mistrial. They have no evidence. There's no crime.
Because, the government like to get the W.
They're about to get an L.
Why you reading my mind, Sylvia? It could come out my mouth fast enough. You beat me.
Auntie
That's
Shell.
crazy.
No, that wasn't Diana Copeland. That was on that thing. That was what's the name of that person?
Who?
The name that was on the permission thing. It wasn't Diana Copeland.
Shell. It was somebody named
Shell. Somebody named Shell or somebody.
No. That wasn't her name. Oh my God! I gotta go through that thing and see what was her name.
That he gave guardianship to?
That the parents.
The parents gave guardianship to him. After he sent her home on the plane. After he found out she was 18 or 17, he shipped that butt home. They turned right around and gave him guardianship. Ain't that crazy?
They didn't give it to him. They gave it to whoever Valerie Payton. Yeah. Valerie Payton. Thank you, it's figure. Valerie Payton. Thank you, Joyce Lee. Valerie Payton. That was the name.
On the paper, it says Auntie Shell.
Yeah, but the letter that they wrote was Valerie Payton.
Oh, well, we're just going by the transcript.
Yeah, but the letter that was that's been floating around on the internet is maybe he called her Shell.
Maybe.
Because he has a nickname for everybody.
How Shell and Valerie?
Maybe her middle name is Michelle. Valerie Michelle Payton. I don't know. Just
Could be.
That's crazy. Oh.
y'all ready to do the next one? The next set. I'm gonna get out and come back in so we can do the next
Okay.
one. To change the date and everything. So guys, my team up here, we're gonna come back inside the link. I'm gonna send you guys the link in a minute.
Okay.
Send it to my phone.
You and this phone thing, because you know I
I
try
like the link in the phone because see, I mean, if you send it through email, it's no problem. I just have to go in my email on my phone and do it that way. But if you send it through the link, I can just click on it and I'm in. But either way, I mean, that's fine. That's fine. No biggie.
Okay, guys, we're gonna come back at 4:30. 4:30. I'm gonna.
Okay.
But you guys come back at 4:15.
So that's 3:15 my time.
Yeah. 3:15.
Okay. Okay.
4:30.
Okay.
So we're gonna go to the next one, which is gonna be August 31st.
31st.
August
Okay.
31st is our date.
So
We'll talk behind the scene. We'll talk behind the scene. All right, guys. I mean, end it. Yeah, you guys stay here. I'll go on.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.